Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, I had a voice radio. So today, we are going to be looking at a very exciting new item card, which has just been revealed in Japan. It's coming out in Sun and Moon 4 Crimson Invasion. It's Peeping Red Card. Now, Peeping Red Card says that you can look at your opponent's hand, and if you like, you can have them shuffle their hand into their deck and draw the same number of cards. You can force your opponent to refresh their hand, but you don't have to. You have a choice, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe you make them refresh their hand, maybe you don't. It's disruption. And what I love about this particular type of disruption is you're not going to accidentally give your opponent a better hand. So take, for instance, red card. Sounds similar? Is similar. Red card just makes your opponent shuffle their hand into their deck and draw 4 new cards. Well, sometimes your opponent has a hand of unplayable trash. And actually, playing a red card is the best thing you can do for them. That's not going to happen with Peeping Red Card. If you look at your opponent's hand and you see their hand is Octillery, Gallade, Fairy Energy when they're playing a Gardevoir deck and struggling to set up, you're going to play this card and then you're going to go, no, you know what, you keep your terrible hand. In this situation, we're assuming they don't have Remoraid on the bench to evolve into Octillery or Kirlia on the bench to evolve into a Gallade. And for this reason, you've got to say this is a good card. I really, really like it. But it's one of those, I mean, in the same way that Super Scoop Up is amazing if you flip heads, and terrible if they flip tails, if you play this and they've got a terrible hand, you've just wasted an item card. But if you play this and they've got a great hand, this is amazing. Sometimes people will have 1 card left in their hand, and ideally for them, it's a Professor Sycamore. So next turn, all they do, play Sycamore, get 7 new cards. Brilliant! And sometimes people have 1 card in their hand and it's terrible, and they hold it, trying to pretend that it is a supporter so that they get end. So that they can get a new hand. Well, with Peeping Red Card, you're sorted, ladies and gentlemen. You look at it, and if their one hand is a Sycamore, the only card in their hand, you play this, you're good. Whereas if their hand is just an energy, you don't play this. It's brilliant. And this is a little bit convoluted, but you could even use this to decide whether to N or not. So let's say, for argument's sake, you've got a Professor Sycamore, and you've got an N in hand. Now, sometimes you really want to play the Sycamore, but you've got, say, a special charge and a double colourless in hand. You really don't want to discard them, but you really don't want to end your opponent if they've got a terrible hand. So what you can do is you can play this. And if your opponent's got a terrible hand, you don't make them shuffle. And if you don't make them shuffle, you then don't play the N, because otherwise you'd be giving them a hand refresh, and you play the Sycamore because you know what? You know now that it's worth discarding those cards in your hand because your opponent has got absolutely nothing. Now, of course, one of the downsides of this card is that a lot of people nowadays, because we're losing Versus Seeker, are going to be playing cards like Oranguru and Octillery. And the problem with your opponent playing these cards is that you can give them a new hand of 3 terrible cards with Peeping Red Card, and then they can use Octillery to draw till 5. Or they can play 1 or 2 of those cards and then use Octillery to draw 4. And that's a bit of a problem here. If your opponent's got draw power like Octillery, like Oranguru, which is going to work on their bench, Oranguru I should say, then you are in an awkward position here, ladies and gentlemen. But there's nothing you can do about that. It's just the way it is. That doesn't mean this is a bad card. It just means that in some matchups you need to be a little bit more careful, because giving your opponent a bad hand of 3 cards is a lot less useful when there's an Octillery down there. The other thing is, this won't stop people top decking out of it. Sometimes people are just going to top deck a Sycamore. You can give them a hand of 1 card when they had a Sycamore, and you give them a new hand of 1 card, and then they might still get the Sycamore, or they might top deck the Sycamore. We've all had those games. There's nothing you can do about it, ladies and gentlemen. Sometimes that happens, and, you know, bad beats, ladies and gentlemen. Bad beats. And the other thing you've got to think about with this card is, do you even have the space in your deck? Because essentially this is a disruption card. You play this to disrupt your opponent to make sure that they can't draw anything. Oh, they've got a bad hand. I'm going to play this to see if they've actually got a bad hand or if they're biding their time. I'll give you one more great example. Let's say your opponent doesn't play a supporter turn 1 in a Gardevoir deck. Sometimes your opponent doesn't play a supporter because they don't have one. Sometimes your opponent doesn't play a supporter because they've got Candy Gardevoir in their hand and a Sycamore. So they want to wait till turn 2, get the Gardevoir and then play the Sycamore. Well, this is really good because it means that if they've got the Candy Gardevoir, you make them refresh their hand. But if they've got a handful of rubbish, you don't make them refresh their hand, and you make them sit there with a terrible, terrible hand. There are many good things about this card. But anyway, there are other disruption cards. Now, one thing to remember off the bat, this is an item card. So, Delinquent, better disruption card. Let's be clear about this. But Delinquent is your only supporter for the turn, and like I've said, we've lost Versus Seeker, so it's hard to reuse Delinquent, although we do still have Tapu Lele that you can use to search out Delinquent. If your opponent has a hand of free cards, you can play Peeping Red card to give them a hopefully worse hand of free cards, or at least to guarantee that the hand of free cards they've got isn't great like it is now. But if you play Delinquent, you can just make them discard all of those free cards in their hand. And then either they top deck something or they don't, but either way, you've done the best you can. As Disruption, Delinquent is generally better. Although sometimes I'll have a hand of 6 cards and I don't mind the discard, but generally, Delinquent's going to be better. Similarly, there's an argument that playing Crushing Hammer as an item card is better as Disruption than playing this as an item card. But then again, Crushing Hammer is flip a coin if heads discard 1 of their energy. If you flip a tails, it's done nothing for you. Maybe this would have been better. Although again, if they had a terrible hand anyway, this doesn't do anything. But at least it gives you the knowledge. Because that's the one thing which should not be overlooked with Peeping Red card. Even if your opponent does have a terrible hand, and you look at it, and you choose not to put their hand back into their deck and get a new hand, you've still got that knowledge. You know what their hand is. So if you see that they've got a Gardevoir but nothing else, you know that if they top deck a rare candy or a Skylar for a rare candy, that then they can actually get something. You know that they are 1 rare candy away from rolling. And one of the best uses here is just trying to make sure your opponent doesn't have the right supporter card. So if they really need an ace roller next turn, maybe they're playing Golisopod and want to heal, then what you can do is you can play this. Maybe they still draw into the ace roller. But you know what? They can't Sycamore to get the ace roller. They've got to actually have the ace roller, and maybe they draw it off the new hand you give them. Fine. That happens sometimes. But maybe they don't, ladies and gentlemen. This takes you from a they've definitely got it to a maybe they don't have it. And then, of course, there are some really specific uses for this. So, for instance, the Trevenant from Guardians Rising. For a double colourless energy, you can use Poltergeist 30 damage times the number of trainer cards in your opponent's hand. What's great here is you use Peeping Red card. If they've got enough trainer cards for you to get the KO, you leave it. If they don't have enough trainer cards for you to get the KO, you make them refresh their hand, maybe you'll get it. The Miss Magius we talked about just a couple of days ago. That blocks off special energy cards along with tools and stadiums. So take Golisopod Garboda. Generally plays mostly special energy with just free grass. So you can use this to look at their hand, and if they've got one of their grass energy, you make them refresh their hand, and the chance of them drawing into it is a little bit lower. I really like this card. It's not for every deck. There are better disruption options. But you know what? You can grab it with a Skylar. You can grab Skylar with Tapu Lele. And sometimes this can literally win you a game. It stops you ending your opponent into a better hand. It makes sure you get the KO with stuff like Trevenant. I am going to give this between 3 and 4 Wassies. I think we don't give half Wassies barbarity. I think it's better than just your general tech, but I don't think it's this amazing every deck kind of card. It's fun, but it's not amazing. But I want to know what you think. Chuck it down in the comment section. Go nuts. Be nice. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. We're going to be doing a live stream, PTCGO, tomorrow, 7 p.m. UK time. Get yourself involved. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus pods, etc., you can do so at patreon.com/PTCGRadio, and I think you should. But I'm a little bit biased. The most important thing, as always, look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.